And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. You're tuned in to Tapped Out. Hosted by Brendan Tobin and Sean Levine. Only on the BetQL network.
Talk fighting with my co-host Brendan Tobin and my producer Jake Noaker. I'm the sports machine, Sean Levine. In just a little while, we're going to bring on Sean O'Connell. He is the play-by-play voice of the PFL. PFL in the news this week because, well, Jake Paul is now a PFL fighter. That's right. He said Jake Paul is now a PFL fighter. First of all, BT, when you heard this news, how surprised were you? Because we know that he's been a boxer, been successful. People have their own opinions, but he's won his fights. Do you think this can work?
Oh, yeah, I think it can work. Honestly, I'm not surprised at all. I think that Jake Paul has found the boxing thing. I really feel like it's run its course for a couple of reasons. One, the boxing community is just never going to embrace him, I think, the way that he wants to. I think he's gotten a little too into people caring about how good a boxer he is. He's never going to find that credit in boxing. There's no real boxers that are of interest. Everybody is a former UFC guy or a former MMA guy that he's going to fight outside of Tyson Fury's brother. So I think this was the right way to go. I think it creates new doubt. I think it creates new intrigue. I think it's going to be actual people, more intriguing matchups to step up. And I think it obviously gives the secret elixir, which is it's more likely that he loses. And that's, I think, ultimately what people want to pay is that Jake Paul's supposed to be a bad guy. People want to see him get his butt kicked, and mixed martial arts adds more of an element to that.
So that's the fight side of it. What about adding Jake Paul to the promotional side of it? Because the PFL hasn't been around for long. And again, we're going to bring on the voice of the PFL so we can ask him all these questions coming up here in just a little while. Sean O'Connell is going to join us here on Tapped Out. But when you get Jake Paul, that guy's got what, like a billion eyeballs on him when it comes to social media, and he's been around forever, and people know him for a lot of different things. So it feels like this is kind of a, all right, let's see if you can actually pull it off. But even if you can't, we want you in our corner.
Yeah, I think that, look, Jake Paul has said a lot of good things about fighter pay, being an advocate for UFC guys kind of getting the short end of things. So I think if you add that mouthpiece and you have any, illusions as the PFL, kind of like Bellator did to either take on the UFC or compete with the UFC, I think it's good to have the UFC's like number one public enemy to kind of be in your corner with that stuff, and also to be a good mouthpiece for the fighters. So I think that is a good mechanism that they have for it. And it doesn't like they think outside the box. That is one thing that you, if you guys haven't watched a lot of PFL, they will bring boxers over. Clarissa Shields has had a couple fights with them. She's raved about her experience with them. They have a lot of ties to the sporting world with athletes are partial owners and things like that. So they do some things that are a little bit outside the box that are interesting. And this does feel like it's right in line with them.
He called out Nate Diaz. And of course, I mean, right now, Nate Diaz is a free agent per se. That would be the one where it feels like if that was his first fight in the octagon, that gets, and he's talking about the pay-per-view, a different type of split, because that's his whole thing, right? Fighters don't get enough money in the UFC. He's publicly called out Dana White. And now with his new kind of, they're calling them the super fights, the super pay-per-view fights, where the fighters themselves would get 50% essentially of the pay-per-view, which is way, way, way more than any sort of pay-per-view points could get you right now in the UFC. And the only reason I bring that up is because typically your answer would just be, yeah, but it's not going to have as many people buying it. I would say touche. If we get Nate Diaz in the octagon, or whatever they call it, in the PFL, with Jake Paul at the top of the marquee, I think that gets a ton of eyeballs and a ton of pay-per-views.
Here's the one thing I would say that is the wrinkle on that that Jake Paul probably won't do, but should. He should do it because he's talking about doing it first in boxing and then doing it in MMA. He should just go straight to MMA and do it. And I know what people are going to say. He's not ready for it. First of all, Nate Diaz isn't going to wrestle you. Like, people want to see you in this place where you got the small gloves on. Again, the key is you want a lot of people to tune into Jake Paul. It's because you want a lot of people to tune in to see you lose. You're doing the Floyd Mayweather method here. You're tuning in to see him get his butt kicked. Having any element that could make it boring, if the boxing match is any good, a la, Tyron Woodley, anything that just takes the sting out of it. It's the surprise element, because his boxing pay-per-views have not been selling. They have not been doing good business. It gets a lot of viral buzz. It gets a lot of, social media clicks, but it doesn't generate some money. And I think that if they want to make the most money, they should just do Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz in a mixed martial arts fight instead of wasting time doing a boxing match.
Completely agree. Brendan Tobin, Jake Noaker, Sean Levine bringing you Tapped Out here on the BetQL Network. If you like fighting, you're in the right place. Boxing tonight, BT, is in Washington, D.C. Gervonta Tank Davis comes in, as he always does, as a big favorite now, minus 1,600 against Hector Luis Garcia. Comes back at a plus 820. You pointed out to me that if you want Tank by decision right now, you can almost get 5-1 on your money. That's sitting at plus 490. I know that Tank is known to be a finisher, and he finished his last fight, but it's not like he's this knockout artist that's knocked out everybody. So that plus 490 for a guy that's got a chin like Luis Garcia looks a little tempting to me.
Yeah, I can see why. I mean, look, Hector Luis Garcia had a good year last year. There's a reason that he's in this spot. He really stunned a lot of people when he beat a guy, Chris Colbert, who was kind of one of PBC's up-and-coming prospects. They called him prime time. He had the cool hair. Everybody thought that Chris Colbert was going to be one of these next stars. And, Hector put it on him. I mean, he really, really beat him good. And so that really skyrocketed him to another spot. He got another win that year against Roger Gutierrez. And so he finds himself in this interesting place of almost playing spoiler, because coming up in April, we are supposed to have Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia, which has already been agreed to. That fight was agreed to before this fight was agreed to. Gervonta just wanted to stay busy and get a fight in and make some money around his hometown. And, Hector has a very interesting opportunity here, almost like an Andrew Ruiz, where he can kind of shake up the whole division and make a name for himself. And we've seen, certain guys with Gervonta can push him. I mean, we saw this with Isaac Cruz not too long ago, where nobody knew who Isaac Cruz was. He put up a good fight against Gervonta. He lost on the scorecards, but a lot of people even thought that he won that fight and then made a name for himself. So very, very intriguing matchup tonight. I still think that Gervonta does get the win. I like him finishing this fight a little bit later, but I don't think this is an easy one for him.
We'll talk a lot more boxing coming up. So if that's your cup of tea, all boxing coming up later on in the show. It just, I don't know, man. I did think that Davis lost that fight a couple of times ago. I've always thought that he was. Did you see the weigh-ins, by the way? Did you see the face-offs? What was Tank doing? What was going on?
Oh, no, man. Listen, he's got a lot going on there. He's trying to, do whatever he can, I guess. But that's something.
That was just weird. Like, just everything about that, he just looked off. Speaking of off, the Dylan Dennis and KSI fight. Who could have imagined? I mean, most of the time, we brush right past this, but Dylan Dennis is turning into the biggest joke in the sport that we love. Like, dude, if you're never gonna fight, just go away.
I honestly, who cares about Dylan Dennis? I don't really even understand. Right. Like, he's Conor McGregor's friend. Like, why do we follow this guy? I don't understand. Like, he's been doing the same gig now. Like, forget about the idea that Conor hasn't won a fight in forever. That's mattered. Now, let's talk about his niche friend. You remember, all these weird people who have been sidekicks in the universe of Conor McGregor. Like, at least Artem Lobov, who now him and Conor hate each other because Artem's suing him. But at least he's gone off and he's not only done a UFC career, he's gone off and bare knuckle fought Paulie Malignaggi and boxed. And Dylan Dennis is one fight. He's got the longest knee injury known to man. Who cares?
I mean, let's not talk about Artem Lobov. I'm pretty sure that guy has the worst winning percentage in the history of the UFC. So, yeah, he was there, but it wasn't a great run. It's good to be Conor McGregor's boy, though. I think that's what we've learned. We'll talk a little Conor McGregor coming up later on in the show. A guy that he once famously fought. You've probably heard of this guy, BT. You like fighting. Khabib Nurmagomedov. From a lot of different sources, it looks like he's stepping away from the MMA completely. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about his own promotion. I'm talking about his own fighters. I'm talking about coaching. And it looks like he's going to focus on, quote, business, family, and other ventures. It just feels like some people, it feels like they love fighting and they've got it in their blood. Some people, it feels like they're just good at it and then they're ready to get out. I think that Khabib is one of those guys that just grew up with it, and his dad being his longtime coach, that maybe he's completely getting away from it so he doesn't get back in the octagon. But this is one that comes to a surprise. I thought he was doing a great job coaching.
No, it definitely was. I think that maybe the case is like he got his guy Islam Makhachev to the belt, and what else is there to do? Like you've succeeded at that. You've been a great coach for him. So maybe he just feels like it is time to finally take some time away and actually have a break and get out of the public eye for a little bit. Like it's a lot of stress, like running your own promotion. He was trying to have not only a Russian version of it, but of an American version of it based down here. And I don't really know how much Eagle FC was catching on. We talked about it. We had some guests on from the promotion. Like, I thought they had some cool stuff, but it was a little bit weird. Like, they had like Tyrone Spong fight in the main event of MMA. He hadn't fought MMA for like 8 years. Diego Sanchez was in the main event of a fight. Kevin Lee came back. That was kind of cool. But like, I think for him, I can see why Khabib would want to take some time away. I feel like, I don't know if it's absolutely the end of him, but I get him definitely wanting to like decompress and get away from this stuff, especially to be with your family.
Yeah, and if you want to spend more time with your family, kudos. I'm just saying you get bored a little bit too easy, my friend. Like you were one of, if not the best fighter in the history of the promotion, but people don't want to say that because everybody knows that he left so much gas left in the tank. Like he beat Connor, he beat Poirier, he beat Gaethje. The heads that he took were incredible, but then that was it. And then, of course, Charles Oliveira had a little bit of a run, and people talked about could he have beat him? And as it turns out, maybe Khabib's just this fortune teller. He's Miss Cleo, and he knew that his boy Islam was on the come up, and just said, "I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to train this guy, to be the next. And then when he becomes champion, I'll get out." If that was his grand plan, BT, then good on him because I can't even figure out what I want for dinner tonight, man.
I mean, he seems like a guy of honor. Like, it was a family promise to get out of fighting. He seemed to do it when he wanted to do it. And I'm sure that part of the mission also was to get Islam to the belt. And that's also been a thing within that camp of AKA. Like you think about like DC fighting at light heavyweight because they never wanted to fight Cain Velasquez. Like they seem like they run that circle. We're seeing this with Aljamain and Marab. So like, I think that I think that's a cool thing, to get out of the path, you get out on top. Too many times we have the story of fighting where it chews up people's lives. They don't know when to get out. He's one of the ones got a lottery ticket. He got out while he was still ahead. He got out healthy. He got out undefeated. Nobody gets to usually go out like that. So good for him if that's the case. But it is fighting. Like if you tell me he's back in 3 years and Khabib has this comeback fight, I won't be surprised, but it is, if it is the end, he truly wants to get out of the public eye for a little bit. Good for him.
Somebody that nobody's describing as a man of honor over the last week or so is Dana White. Now, Dana's had a history of all kinds of different things, and he's upset people. He's got under people's skin. People have tried to fight him, but this was a little bit different. At this point, you probably, if you're listening to the show, know what I'm talking about. Dana White was caught on video essentially slapping his wife. It was a back and forth altogether. What do you think is the end game here? Because right now, really nothing's happened, and Dana does the blanket Friday thing that I'm sure you're aware of. Every Friday, he puts it online. He eats some spaghetti with waffles and ice cream and gasoline. He puts a bunch of weird stuff together and he eats it. And he did it again yesterday, being Friday, and got a lot of criticism because people were saying, "Well, the last time we saw you was in this video." Something's got to happen, right?
It's a fascinating question, man. I don't know. Everybody seems to be very scared who's actually tied to the UFC to really want to go any direction towards criticizing him. You'll have some big names outside of the scope from like Showtime or Ariel Helwani or things like that, where like they'll obviously go and venture and criticize. But anybody, like what I saw ESPN do this week, where there was an order from their writers not to criticize Dana White. What happened on First Take was atrocious between Stephen A. Smith and Molly Kerm, the way that they handled that whole thing. I thought as ESPN being the broadcast partner, that was going to lead to Dana White being more severely punished because Disney didn't want any association with that. And I'm not saying Dana White should be fired, but certainly like some idea of going away for half a year, something like that. And it doesn't feel like we're going to come anywhere close to any of that he got out in front of the story. TMZ, got on the PR spin of it of, no excuses. The statement from the wife, they got the jump on this. And I don't know, man. I don't know if anything's going to happen. Something definitely should, but it doesn't feel like we're going in that direction.
It feels like, and I think we've known this for a while, I don't know exactly what his title is these days, president or CEO, but he's judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to everything in the UFC. We can pretend like there are other people that are involved or above him or decision makers, but ultimately it comes back to his desk. And so when it involves him, it's not good. So something has to happen. Coming up next, we're going to get out of the UFC, but we're going to talk about the PFL with the voice of the PFL. Certainly Jake Paul is going to be a hot topic of conversation with Sean O'Connell as he joins us here on Tapped Out. You're locked into the BetQL Network.